Before you drift off into dreamland, let me tuck you into a tale of clanging misery and soot-stained sorrow. Tonight, we journey back to a time when your job was to hammer metal until your fingers forgot they existed. Your neighbors blamed you for every loud noise, and your only reward was a lukewarm ale and a backache that lasted until death. Welcome to the world of the medieval blacksmith, where every day was a Monday, and every tool was out to get you. And hey, before your eyelids betray you, like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Whether it's a cozy bed in London, a haunted forge in Transylvania, or a suspiciously modern dungeon with Wi-Fi, we're judging you gently from the soot-covered sidelines. The mattress was made of straw, not the romantic kind you see in paintings. Golden, fluffy, arranged like a Renaissance Instagram post. No, this was the medieval kind. Angry, pokey, and possibly sentient. Each morning, the blacksmith awoke with a new constellation of scratches, a mild hay fever, and the creeping suspicion that the mattress was plotting against him. It rustled ominously when he moved. It squeaked in Latin. It had absorbed so much soot over the years that it was technically part of the forge. He had once tried to fluff it. The straw retaliated. A rogue stalk jabbed him in the kidney and whispered, "You brought this on yourself." Sleep, in theory, was meant to be restorative. In practice, it was just a horizontal negotiation with discomfort. The pillow, if one could call a sack of barley a pillow, had the emotional support of a brick and the softness of a moral dilemma. The blanket was wool. It had seen things. It smelled faintly of regret and sheep. It was also slightly damp, for reasons no one could explain. Outside, the rooster crowed again. The blacksmith considered throwing the mattress at it, but the mattress would probably miss on purpose. He sat up. His spine made a noise, like a medieval door hinge. His knees filed a formal complaint. His toes had unionized overnight and were demanding better circulation. He stretched. The mattress sighed. It was tired too. Breakfast was still porridge. It had congealed into a shape that resembled disappointment. He poked it with a spoon. It poked back. He glanced at the forge. The fire had gone out again. It was becoming a pattern. He'd need to relight it using flint, steel, and the last shreds of his will to live. But first, he had to stand up. The mattress clung to him like a needy ex. He peeled himself off, straw sticking to his tunic, his hair, his soul. He muttered, "One day, I'll get a feather bed." The mattress laughed. It knew. The blacksmith stared at the bowl. It stared back. It was porridge. Again, it had the consistency of regret and the color of medieval wallpaper, beige with a hint of sadness. He poked it with a spoon. It wobbled. He poked it again. It retaliated. This was not breakfast. This was a negotiation. In theory, porridge was nutritious. In practice, it was a warm puddle of betrayal. It had been made with oats, water, and the faint memory of flavor. No honey, no fruit, just vibes. He took a bite. It tasted like someone had whispered food into a bucket of mud. He chewed slowly, not because it required chewing, but because he was stalling. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again. The blacksmith considered throwing the porridge at it, but the porridge might miss on purpose. He glanced at the hearth. Cold. The fire had died overnight, as fires do when left alone with nothing but passive-aggressive logs and a blacksmith who forgot to care. He'd need to relight it soon. But first he had to finish breakfast, or at least make eye contact with it. He sighed. One day, he whispered, "I'll eat something that doesn't look like it was scraped off a medieval boot." The porridge gurgled ominously. He took another bite. It tasted like surrender. In the corner, a rat watched him, with pity. Even the rat had standards. He remembered a rumor, one whispered by a traveling bard, that in distant lands, people ate eggs, real eggs, with yolks. He had never seen one. He assumed they were mythical, like dragons or tax collectors who smiled. The village baker passed by the window, carrying a tray of bread that smelled like hope. The blacksmith waved. The baker waved back. Neither spoke. They were both too tired to pretend mornings were a good idea. He finished the porridge. It finished him. He stood up, his joints creaking like a haunted cupboard. The day awaited. The forge needed lighting. The tools needed glaring at. The night would probably return, asking for a spoon upgrade. The rooster crowed. Of course it did. It was contractually obligated by medieval law to scream directly into the blacksmith S1 functioning ear at precisely the wrong time. Not sunrise, not pre-dawn, just chaos o'clock. The blacksmith opened one eye. The straw mattress beneath him rustled like a sack of angry hedgehogs. His spine, meanwhile, performed a slow, interpretive dance called regret. He sat up, immediately regretted it. His knees sounded like someone stepping on a bag of walnuts. His back whispered threats. His left elbow had gone on strike sometime last week and was now just decorative. Breakfast awaited. It was porridge. It was always porridge. Sometimes it was hot. Today it was not. It had the consistency of remorse and the flavor of beige. Outside, the village stirred. A child screamed. A cow screamed louder. A monk walked past, humming something ominous. The blacksmith sighed. Another day of hammering metal until it either obeyed or shattered, preferably both. He shuffled to the forge, which had all the warmth of a disappointed parent. The fire had died overnight, as fires tend to do when left alone with nothing but passive-aggressive logs. He knelt, muttered something vaguely threatening to the flint, and began the sacred ritual of, "Please light, I'm too tired to cry." Sparks flew. One landed on his foot. He didn't flinch. Pain was just part of the ambiance now. The forge coughed to life. Smoke curled upward like a ghost trying to escape a bad marriage. The blacksmith nodded solemnly. Another day had begun. He glanced at his tools. The hammer glared at him. The tongs sulked. The anvil sat smugly, knowing full well it was the only thing in the room that didn't have to move. A knock at the door. It was the village knight. He wanted a spoon. Again. The blacksmith blinked. "You have a sword," he said. "Yes," the knight replied. "But soup is a different kind of battle." The blacksmith sighed. He would forge the spoon. He would forge it with dignity. He would forge it while questioning every life choice that led to this moment. The forge was cold. Not refreshing morning breeze cold. Not crisp autumn air cold. No, this was the kind of cold that whispered, "You should have been a baker." The blacksmith stood before it, flint in one hand, steel in the other, and a soul full of doubt. Lighting the forge was a daily ritual, a sacred ceremony, a test of patience, skill, and how many curse words you could mutter before breakfast. He struck the flint. Nothing. He struck it again. Still nothing. He struck it a third time and accidentally set fire to a nearby chicken feather. Progress. The logs were damp. Of course they were. They had spent the night absorbing moisture, regret, and possibly the tears of the apprentice who quit last week. He arranged the kindling like a man pretending he knew what he was doing. He whispered encouragement. He threatened it, gently. He offered it porridge. Still nothing. Smoke began to curl upward. A good sign. Then it curled sideways. Then downward. Then into his tunic. He coughed. The forge coughed back. They were in a toxic relationship. He added more kindling. The fire flickered. He added more hope. The fire laughed. Finally, after a series of increasingly desperate strikes, the forge roared to life. It was not a majestic roar. It was more of a wheeze, but it was fire, and that was enough. He stood back, soot on his face, pride in his heart, and a mild burn on his left thumb. The forge was awake. So was he. Unfortunately, he glanced at his tools. They glistened in the firelight, smug and silent. The hammer looked pleased. The tongs looked judgmental. The anvil remained indifferent. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again, the blacksmith considered forging a mute button. He turned to the fire, now crackling with enthusiasm, and whispered. The blacksmith stood before his tools. They stood before him. It was a standoff. No one blinked, mostly because tools don't have eyes. The hammer was first, heavy, judgmental. It had a chip in its head and a chip on its shoulder. It had been forged during a thunderstorm and had never emotionally recovered. Every time he picked it up, it whispered, "You could have been a poet." Next came the tongs, long, awkward, and designed by someone who clearly hated ergonomics. They pinched everything except what they were supposed to. They had one job, hold hot metal. They preferred to hold his fingers. The chisel was nearby, sharp in theory. In practice, it was more of a suggestion. It had once carved a beautiful rune into a sword hilt. It had since retired and now specialized in disappointment. The bellows sat in the corner, wheezing. It had the energy of a Victorian ant with a fainting couch. It puffed air like it was doing him a favor. It had one hole, patched with a piece of regret. The anvil, of course, was the ringleader. Massive, immovable. It had seen things. It had heard every curse word in 3 languages. It didn't care. It just sat there, smug and silent, like a medieval therapist who charged by the bruise. There was also a bucket. No one knew what it was for. It held water sometimes. Other times, it held existential dread. The blacksmith sighed. He picked up the hammer. It groaned. He picked up the tongs. They bit him. He picked up the chisel. It fell apart. He looked at the forge. It was glowing, ready. He looked at his tools. They were glowing too, but with resentment. The tongs sat on the workbench, smug and silent, long, metallic, and vaguely threatening. They resembled the kind of tool you'd use to remove curses or apply them. The blacksmith picked them up. They immediately pinched his thumb. Not hard, just enough to remind him who was in charge. Tongs were supposed to help. They were meant to hold hot metal, protect your hands, and make forging slightly less suicidal. Instead, they specialized in dropping things at the worst possible moment and gripping objects like a medieval toddler with buttered fingers. He once tried to hold a horseshoe with them. The tongs held it for exactly 0.7 seconds before launching it across the room and into a bucket of soup. The soup was not his. The monk who owned the soup was not amused. There were different kinds of tongs. Flat-jawed tongs, wolf-jawed tongs, scroll tongs. All of them had one thing in common: a deep, personal hatred for precision. He had a favorite pair once. They were slightly bent, slightly rusted, and slightly less malicious than the others. He named them Mildred. Mildred lasted 3 weeks before snapping in half during a sword commission. The knight was not amused. The sword was now a dagger. The dagger was now a spoon. He tried repairing Mildred. She refused. She had moved on emotionally. The forge crackled behind him. The fire was ready. The metal was glowing. The tongs were sulking. He reached for a new pair. They hissed. He wasn't sure how. He wasn't sure why. But they did. He gripped the glowing iron. The tongs held it, then dropped it, then held it again, then twisted it into a shape that resembled a medieval pretzel. The blacksmith sighed. He missed using his hands. He missed not having burns. The bucket sat in the corner, wooden, warped. It had a handle made of twisted iron and a personality made of spite. It was supposed to hold water. Sometimes it did. Other times, it held disappointment, regret, and the occasional frog. The blacksmith approached it cautiously. He needed water to cool the iron. The bucket knew this. It had plans. He dipped it into the well. It filled halfway, then leaked sideways, then dribbled upward somehow. He carried it back to the forge. It sloshed. It giggled. It whispered, "You should have been a cobbler." The water inside was murky. It had bits of straw, bits of soot, and one suspiciously judgmental beetle. The blacksmith stared at it. The beetle stared back. They understood each other. He poured the water onto the hot iron. Steam hissed. The bucket wheezed. The beetle fled. The bucket had been with him for years. It had survived 3 apprentices, 2 accidental fires, and 1 incident involving a goat and a ceremonial ladle. It had never once behaved. He tried patching it once, used wax, used cloth, used hope. It leaked anyway. He considered replacing it, but the village cooper charged 3 chickens and a mildly enchanted spoon. He had neither, so the bucket stayed, mocking him, leaking, judging. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again. The blacksmith considered dunking it in the bucket. The bucket would probably spit it back out. The anvil didn't move. It never did. It had been in the same spot for 17 years, give or take a century. It weighed more than a horse, less than a cathedral, and exactly enough to ruin your foot if you dared to challenge its authority. The blacksmith approached it like one might approach a sleeping dragon, slowly, respectfully, and with a mild sense of dread. The anvil didn't blink. It didn't breathe, but it radiated judgment. It was made of iron, forged in a time when people still believed in curses and didn't believe in back support. Its surface was dented, scratched, and stained with the ghosts of failed projects. There was a notch on the side from the time he tried to forge a ceremonial ladle and accidentally summoned a minor kitchen demon. The demon had been polite. The ladle had not. The anvil had a face, not literally, but emotionally. It had a flat top that said, "Try harder," a horn that said, "You'll never be good enough," and a base that whispered, "I've seen better blacksmiths in soup." He placed a glowing piece of iron on its surface. The anvil didn't flinch. It never did. It absorbed the heat, the impact, and the existential despair. He hammered. The anvil echoed. The sound rang out across the village, like a medieval alarm clock. Children groaned. Cows mooed in protest. The rooster crowed in solidarity. The blacksmith paused. Sweat dripped from his brow. His arms ached. His soul considered early retirement. The anvil remained unimpressed. He had tried replacing it once, brought in a newer model, sleeker, shinier. It cracked within a week. The old anvil watched the whole thing, smug and silent. He had tried talking to it, tried naming it, tried apologizing for that time he dropped a hot horseshoe on its horn. It never responded. It just sat there, absorbing his failures, like a sponge made of disappointment. Sometimes, late at night, he imagined the anvil whispering advice. Strike with confidence. Angle your blows. You should have been a baker. He ignored it. Mostly. The forge crackled behind him. The fire danced. The tools sulked. The anvil remained. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again. The blacksmith considered forging a second anvil, just to drop it on the rooster. He wiped his brow, lifted the hammer, struck again. The anvil rang out, clear and cold. The forge was warm. The tools were ready. The blacksmith was emotionally unprepared, because today, like every day, the customers would come, and they would bring with them confusion, chaos, and a complete disregard for physics, metallurgy, and basic human decency. The first to arrive was a peasant. He wanted a plowshare, but not just any plowshare. He wanted one that sang to the soil. The blacksmith blinked. The peasant blinked back. They stared at each other for a full minute before the peasant handed over 3 turnips and a live chicken as payment. The chicken was judgmental. The turnips were suspiciously soft. Next came the village knight. He had returned. Again. Still asking for a spoon. I need it for soup, he said, adjusting his armor dramatically. You have a sword, the blacksmith replied. Not for the first time. Yes, the knight said, but soup is a different kind of battle. The blacksmith forged the spoon. It was slightly crooked. The knight called it heroic. Then came the monk, silent, hooded. He slid a scroll across the counter. It contained a drawing of a bell, a very large bell, with runes, and a note that read, "Must be loud enough to wake the dead." The blacksmith considered asking questions. He did not. He forged the bell. It rang once and caused 3 chickens to faint. The monk nodded solemnly and vanished into the mist. The mist had not been there before. Later, a child arrived. He wanted a sword. The blacksmith asked why. The child said, "For dragon practice." The blacksmith asked where the dragon was. The child pointed at a goat. The goat looked offended. The blacksmith forged a wooden sword. The child was thrilled. The goat was unconvinced. Then came the baker. He didn't want anything forged. He just wanted to complain about the bell. It had disrupted his sourdough's rising schedule. The blacksmith apologized. The baker forgave him. They shared a moment of mutual exhaustion. By midday, the forge was cluttered with half-finished requests. A horseshoe shaped like a heart. A ladle engraved with a poem about soup. A rake that doubled as a musical instrument. The blacksmith sighed. He missed making normal things, like nails or silence. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again, the blacksmith considered forging a customer complaint box, then forging a lid for it, then sealing it forever. The night returned. Again, clanking down the cobbled path like a walking pantry full of regrets. His armor gleamed in the morning sun, which was impressive, considering it was mostly covered in soup stains. The blacksmith didn't look up. He knew the sound, the rhythm of metal boots, the faint slosh of broth, and the unmistakable sigh of a man who had once jousted a ladle. Good morrow, the knight said, dramatically removing his helmet. Steam rose from inside. The blacksmith wasn't sure if it was sweat or stew. I require a spoon, the knight declared. Again, the blacksmith gestured to the rack. There were spoons, many spoons, spoons of iron, spoons of bronze, one spoon that looked suspiciously like a bent sword. The knight examined them like a jeweler inspecting cursed gemstones. He picked one up, twirled it, sniffed it. This one lacks gravitas, he said. The blacksmith blinked. The spoon blinked back. Emotionally. I need a spoon, the knight continued. That speaks of valor. That whispers of destiny. That can handle thick stew without bending like a coward. The blacksmith sighed. He had forged swords for kings. He had made armor for crusaders. He had once accidentally crafted a ladle that summoned geese. But this knight wanted a spoon that could win wars. He selected a fresh piece of iron. He heated it. He hammered it. He shaped it with the precision of a man who had given up on understanding the universe. The forge crackled. The anvil groaned. The tongs tried to sabotage the process. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again. The blacksmith ignored it. He was focused. Hours passed. The spoon took shape. It had a wide bowl, a sturdy handle, and a faint aura of existential dread. He handed it to the knight. The knight held it aloft, like Excalibur. Lightning did not strike, but a nearby goat fainted. This, the knight whispered, is the spoon of legend. The blacksmith nodded. He was too tired to argue. The knight paid in gold. Real gold. Not turnips. Not chickens. Actual currency. The blacksmith stared at the coin. It shimmered. It mocked him gently. The knight bowed, mounted his horse, rode off into the mist, spoon in hand, ready to conquer dinner. The blacksmith sat down. His back ached. His soul ached. His forge glowed softly. The monk arrived at dawn. Hooded, silent. He glided more than walked, like a shadow with a budget. His robes were dark, his sandals were dusty, and his expression was somewhere between eternally wise and mildly constipated. The blacksmith was not ready. He had just finished breakfast, porridge again, now with extra disappointment, and was preparing to argue with the bellows. Instead, he found himself staring at a scroll. The monk placed it on the workbench without a word. It was tied with twine and smelled faintly of incense and unresolved trauma. The blacksmith untied it. Inside was a drawing. A bell, a very large bell, covered in runes. Some familiar, some wiggly. At the bottom, in elegant script, were the words, "Must be loud enough to wake the dead." The blacksmith blinked. The monk did not. "Is this for a church?" the blacksmith asked. The monk nodded, then shook his head, then shrugged, then vanished behind a puff of philosophical ambiguity. The blacksmith stared at the scroll. He had forged bells before, small ones, medium ones, one that accidentally summoned geese. But this was a bell with ambition. He began the process, selected the iron, heated the forge, threatened the tongs, ignored the rooster. The mold was massive. It took 3 days to shape, 2 days to regret, and 1 day to question whether he was accidentally building a medieval alarm system for necromancers. He engraved the runes carefully. One looked like a fish. One looked like a sneeze. One looked like his ex-apprentice's handwriting, which was deeply concerning. The bell was poured. It cooled. It gleamed. The monk returned, still silent, still hovering. He inspected the bell, tapped it once. It rang. The sound was unsettling. It echoed through the village. Windows rattled. Cows panicked. The rooster fainted. The monk nodded, placed a single silver coin on the anvil. then vanished into the mist. The mist had not been there before. The blacksmith sat down. His ears rang. His soul rang. The forge crackled nervously. Outside, the villagers gathered. They asked questions. They demanded explanations. They threw bread. The blacksmith shrugged. He had simply followed instructions. The blacksmith's forge was not in a quiet corner of the world. It was nestled in the heart of the village, strategically placed between the bakery, the well, and the local chicken conspiracy headquarters. Every morning, as he lit the forge and whispered threats to the bellows, the village came alive. And by alive, he meant loud. Children screamed, not in fear, not in pain, just recreational screaming. They ran past the forge in packs, wielding sticks, imaginary swords, and occasionally a goat on a leash. One child had taken to yelling, "Dragon!" every time the blacksmith hammered something. It was unclear whether he was pretending to slay dragons or summon them. Either way, the goat was not amused. Then there were the chickens, dozens of them, possibly hundreds. They roamed freely, pecking at everything that wasn't nailed down, and some things that were. One particularly bold chicken had claimed the forge as its personal throne. It sat on the anvil. It stared at the blacksmith. It blinked slowly, like a feathery monarch judging his technique. He tried shooing it. It pecked his glove. He tried bribing it with grain. It demanded porridge. The rooster, of course, was the ringleader. It crowed every hour, not at sunrise, not at noon, just whenever it felt dramatic, tension was needed. The blacksmith suspected it had a flair for storytelling. Villagers passed by constantly. Some waved. Some shouted requests. One woman asked if he could forge a rake shaped like a harp. He said yes. He regretted it immediately. The well was nearby, which meant constant splashing, gossiping, and the occasional bucket duel. Two children once fought over a bucket using ladles as swords. The blacksmith gave them pointers. The ladles bent. The children cried. The chickens applauded. Noise was constant. Hammering, clucking, screaming. Occasional medieval yodeling. The blacksmith had learned to tune it out. Mostly, except for the goat. The goat had a scream that pierced the soul. He once tried forging in silence, closed the shutters, blocked the door, lit the forge in solitude. The chickens broke in. The children followed. The goat screamed. He gave up. Now, he worked with the chaos. He timed his hammer strikes to the rhythm of the rooster. He used chicken feathers to dust off the anvil. He taught the children how to hold tongs. Badly, the blacksmith wiped his brow. Again. It was the third time in 10 minutes, and his sleeve was now less fabric and more sponge. The forge roared. The hammer rang. The sweat poured like medieval poetry. Dramatic, excessive, and mostly unappreciated. He had been working since dawn, forging horseshoes, plowshares, spoons for emotionally unstable nights, and one rake that doubled as a musical instrument. His arms ached. His back had filed for divorce. His knees were negotiating terms. And for all this, he earned a turnip, sometimes two, occasionally a coin if the stars aligned, and the customer wasn't a monk with a vow of poverty and a bell fetish. Silver was rare. Gold was mythical. Most payments came in the form of vegetables, livestock, or vague promises of future gratitude. One man paid with a loaf of bread. It was mostly crust. Another offered a song. It was off-key. and emotionally confusing. The village economy was a barter system held together by hope and passive-aggressive chickens. The baker traded bread for firewood. The tailor traded tunics for gossip. The blacksmith traded his soul for a slightly dented bucket. He once tried raising his prices, declared that a sword would cost 3 silver coins and a compliment. The villagers laughed. The goat laughed. The rooster crowed in mockery, so he lowered them again, back to 1 silver coin, or the equivalent in onions. He had a drawer full of onions. It was not helpful. The guild offered no support. They sent a scroll once, declaring that blacksmiths are the backbone of civilization. It was written in Latin. It was also unpaid. He considered quitting, becoming a baker, or a bard, or a man who sells spoons exclusively to knights with soup trauma. But he stayed, because someone had to forge the nails. Someone had to repair the hinges. Someone had to hammer metal until it resembled something useful, or at least vaguely decorative. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again, the blacksmith considered charging it rent. He looked at his hands, calloused, burnt, covered in soot, and the faint memory of porridge. He looked at his coin pouch. It contained 1 silver coin, 3 buttons, and a pebble shaped like disappointment. The blacksmith stared at the mug. It was wooden. It was chipped. It was filled with something that claimed to be ale, but tasted like regret and river water. This was his payment. For a full day's work, he had forged a gate hinge, repaired a pitchfork, and reshaped a horseshoe that had been trampled by a cow with anger issues. And for all that, he got ale. 1 mug, warm. In the village economy, ale was more than a beverage. It was a unit of exchange, a social lubricant, a mildly fermented apology for the lack of silver. The tavern keeper was the unofficial banker. He kept tabs. He settled debts. He once traded a barrel of ale for a goat, a poem, and a spoon forged during a thunderstorm. The blacksmith had a tab. It was long. It was poetic. It included items like emergency mead, post-anvil therapy pint, and that time with the bell. He had tried asking for coin. The villagers laughed. The tavern keeper offered him a second mug. It was slightly colder. It tasted like ambition and barley. He once received a keg for forging a sword. It was a good sword, balanced, sharp. The knight used it to cut bread. The keg lasted 3 days. The hangover lasted longer. Ale was also used for bartering. 1 mug for a horseshoe, 2 for a rake, 3 and a song for a ladle that didn't summon geese. The blacksmith had learned to accept it. He drank sparingly, mostly because he suspected the ale was brewed by someone who had never met a hop. He tried saving it once, stored it in a barrel. The barrel leaked. The chickens got drunk. The rooster sang opera. He considered brewing his own, read a scroll, gathered ingredients, accidentally created vinegar. The villagers still drank it, called it bold. He called it a mistake. Outside, the forge crackled. The anvil judged. The tongs sulked. The mug sat on the workbench, sweating gently. He took a sip. It was warm. It was bitter. It was his paycheck. The blacksmith was mid-hammer when he heard the sound. Not the clang of metal, not the hiss of steam. No, this was the soft, sinister rustle of parchment, the sound of bureaucracy approaching. He turned slowly. There, standing in the doorway, like a medieval spreadsheet in human form, was the tax collector. Robes, quill, expression like a man who hadn't smiled since the last plague. "Good morrow," the collector said, in a tone that suggested the morrow would not be good. "I'm here for the king's share?" The blacksmith blinked. He had no king. He had no share. He had a bucket full of soot and a drawer full of onions. The collector unrolled a scroll. It was long. It was handwritten. It included phrases like forge duty, anvil levy, and chicken proximity surcharge. The blacksmith stared. The scroll stared back. "I've paid," he said. "Not this quarter," the collector replied. "It's the same quarter as last quarter." Not emotionally. The blacksmith sighed. He reached for his coin pouch. It contained 1 silver coin, 3 buttons, and a pebble shaped like despair. The collector frowned. He pulled out a smaller scroll. It listed acceptable forms of payment: coin, grain, livestock, emotional stability, crossed out. The blacksmith offered a chicken. The chicken refused. The collector accepted it anyway. Then came the inspection. The forge was measured. The tools were judged. The anvil was weighed emotionally. The collector made notes. He muttered things like excessive soot and unlicensed ladle production. He paused at the bell. The one forged for the monk. It hummed softly. The collector frowned. "Is this necromantic?" "It's ecclesiastical," the blacksmith lied. The collector nodded, made a note, charged a spiritual resonance fee. By the end of the visit, the blacksmith had paid in coin, chicken, and dignity. The collector packed his scrolls, mounted his donkey, rode off at a speed best described as passive-aggressive. The blacksmith sat down. His forge crackled. His tools sulked. His anvil judged. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again, the blacksmith considered forging a tax on poultry noise. The scroll arrived by pigeon. Not a majestic carrier pigeon, just a regular pigeon with attitude and a limp. It dropped the scroll onto the forge, pecked the anvil once for dominance, and flew off sideways. The scroll was sealed with wax and disappointment. It bore the mark of the Guild of Blacksmiths, farriers, and people who hit things professionally. The blacksmith sighed. He had been summoned. Guild meetings were held monthly, unless someone forgot. Then they were held whenever someone remembered and had enough ale to bribe the scribe. He packed his tools, not for forging, just for emotional support. He wore his cleanest tunic. It was only mildly scorched. The guild hall was located in the back of the tannery, next to the room where they stored mysterious smells. Inside, a dozen blacksmiths sat in a circle, each one looking like they'd wrestled a forge and lost. The grand smith stood at the front. He wore a ceremonial apron and a hat shaped like an anvil. No one knew why. No one asked. "Welcome," he said, "to the 143rd meeting of the Guild of Grumps." Everyone groaned in unison. It was tradition. The agenda was read aloud. It included complaints about soot distribution, debates over hammer etiquette, a vote on whether porridge counts as a valid form of payment, a brief moment of silence for Mildred the Tongs. May she rest in rust. The blacksmith tried to pay attention. He really did. But the chair was made of splinters. The scribe kept sneezing, and someone was forging a spoon in the corner for emotional reasons. Then came the scrolls. So many scrolls. Declarations. Regulations. One scroll simply read, "Don't hit things angrily. Hit them professionally." He was asked to sign a new code of conduct. It included clauses like no forging after midnight, unless haunted, no using the anvil as a pillow, No forging bells that summon geese, demons, or tax collectors. He signed. He regretted it instantly. Then came the dues. 1 silver coin, or 3 turnips, or a poem about metallurgy. He paid in onions. The treasurer wept softly. The meeting ended with a toast. Ale was served. It was warm. It tasted like compromise. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again, the blacksmith considered proposing a guild-wide poultry ban. He returned to his forge. Tired, sooty, emotionally taxed, the blacksmith was single. Not by choice, not by fate, mostly by profession. It was hard to be romantic when you smelled like burnt iron and disappointment. Harder still when your idea of a candlelit evening involved a forge, a hammer, and a chicken judging you from the windowsill. He had tried. Once. Her name was Elspeth. She was the baker's daughter. With flour in her hair and dreams in her eyes, she had smiled at him once while buying a horseshoe. He had dropped the horseshoe. On his foot, the scream echoed for 3 villages. He had written her a poem. It rhymed, forge with scourge. It was not well received. Another time, he courted a traveling herbalist. She admired his craftsmanship. He admired her ability to identify plants that weren't just leaf. They shared a mug of ale. She left the next morning with a spoon and a vague sense of pity. Romance was difficult. His hands were calloused. His tunics were scorched. His idea of small talk involved metallurgy and the emotional complexity of tongs. He once tried attending a village dance. He wore his cleanest boots. He combed his hair with a horseshoe file. He arrived late, covered in soot, and accidentally set fire to the refreshment table with a still hot ladle. He was not invited back. The forge was his companion. It glowed warmly. It hissed occasionally. It never asked him to explain his feelings. The anvil was his therapist. It listened. It judged. It offered no advice. He had considered forging a companion, a statue, a sculpture, something with eyes that didn't blink, and expectations that didn't involve flowers. He tried once, made a figure out of scrap iron, named her Mildred. She rusted in the rain. The chickens nested in her torso. He gave up. Love, in the time of soot, was a distant dream, a flicker in the forge, a whisper in the bellows. Outside, the rooster crowed. Again, the blacksmith considered forging a heart-shaped horseshoe, then remembered how badly that went last time. He sat by the fire, alone, content-ish. The apprentice arrived on a Tuesday, which was already suspicious. Nothing good ever started on a Tuesday. He was young, eager, covered in enthusiasm and a tunic 2 sizes too big. He introduced himself as Thistle. The blacksmith blinked. The goat blinked. No one was impressed. Thistle had dreams, big ones. He wanted to forge swords for kings, armor for dragons, and spoons that could stir destiny. The blacksmith handed him a broom. Day 1 was sweeping. Day 2 was sorting nails. Day 3 was asking why the nails were angry. Thistle had questions. So many questions. Why is the fire hot? Can I name the hammer? Is it normal for the bucket to whisper? The blacksmith answered patiently. Mostly. Sometimes he just pointed at the anvil and let it do the judging. Thistle's first forging attempt was a ladle. It came out shaped like a question mark. He called it abstract. The chickens used it as a perch. He tried making a horseshoe. It resembled a pretzel. The horse refused to wear it. The goat tried to eat it. He once dropped a glowing piece of iron into the water bucket. Steam exploded. The rooster fainted. The forge coughed for 3 hours, but he was persistent. He showed up early. He stayed late. He burned himself regularly and apologized to the tools. The blacksmith began to soften. He taught Thistle how to angle a strike, how to listen to the metal, how to threaten the bellows without crying. They forged together spoons, shovels, one ceremonial rake for a wedding that may or may not have involved goats. Thistle improved, slowly, painfully, with occasional setbacks involving molten iron and emotional breakdowns. He named the tongs Gerald. He wrote a poem about the anvil. He tried forging a bell that sang. It screamed instead. The villagers grew fond of him. He waved at children. He gave chickens tiny helmets. He once serenaded a cow with a lute made of scrap metal. The blacksmith watched, proud, confused, slightly concerned. Then, one day, Thistle left, off to apprentice under a royal armorer. He packed his tools. His tunic still didn't fit. He hugged the anvil. It did not hug back. The forge felt quieter. The chickens mourned. The goat screamed in tribute. The blacksmith stood alone, hammer in hand, soot on face, memories in the air. It began with a hum, soft, subtle, the kind of sound that makes you pause mid-hammer and wonder if your forge has developed feelings. The bell had been forged for a monk, tall, runes etched into its sides. It rang once during testing and caused 3 chickens to molt spontaneously. The blacksmith had called that a success. The monk had nodded. The villagers had not. The bell was installed in the village square, high above the bakery, suspended from a wooden frame that creaked like it had secrets. The first official ring was scheduled for Sunday. The monk arrived. The villagers gathered. The blacksmith stood off to the side, holding a mug of ale and a vague sense of dread. The monk rang the bell. Once, the sound was biblical. It echoed across the valley. It shook windows. It startled cows into interpretive dance. It caused the rooster to forget how to crow and instead recite a Latin phrase no one had taught it. The baker dropped his sourdough. The tailor fainted into a pile of tunics. The goat screamed. Twice. Children cried. Adults cried louder. The bell kept ringing. Not physically, just emotionally. The monk smiled. The villagers did not. Complaints began immediately. The bell was too loud, too mystical, too judgmental. One woman claimed it made her bread rise too fast. Another said it summoned her ex-husband. A third insisted it had caused her cat to develop opinions about theology. The blacksmith was summoned to a village council. He was asked to explain the bell's behavior. He said, "It's just iron." The bell rang softly in the distance. Everyone flinched. He offered to dampen the sound, added leather padding, stuffed the clapper with hay. The bell rang again. The hay caught fire. Eventually, the bell was removed, lowered carefully, buried behind the forge. The chickens held a vigil. The monk left town. The villagers returned to normal. The goat never did. The blacksmith stared at the buried bell. It hummed faintly. He considered forging a smaller one, then remembered the rooster's Latin outburst, and reconsidered. The blacksmith was 32, which in medieval terms meant he was ancient. His knees had unionized. His back had become a weather oracle. His left thumb had retired early, and now only showed up for ceremonial ladle commissions. He had forged thousands of things: swords, spoons, one rake that played music when shaken aggressively. He had survived tax collectors, rogue chickens, emotionally unstable nights, and a bell that may or may not have summoned the undead. Now, he sat by the forge, not to work, but to watch. The fire crackled gently. The tools rested. The anvil, still smug, had finally stopped judging him out loud. The village had changed. Children no longer screamed, "Dragon!" when he hammered. They screamed unicorn instead. Progress. The apprentice had gone off to forge armor for royalty. The monk had vanished into mist. The rooster had retired to a quieter coop and now only crowed on special occasions, like eclipses or dramatic bread failures. The forge still worked, but the blacksmith didn't. Not like before. He spent his days sipping lukewarm ale, telling stories to wide-eyed children, and occasionally forging a spoon just to keep the muscle memory alive. He had earned his rest, earned every soot-stained sigh, every burn, every onion paid in lieu of coin. And though he never became rich, never forged for kings, never found love that didn't rust in the rain, he had lived, fully, loudly, sleepily. Outside, the stars blinked. The moon yawned. The forge dimmed to a gentle glow. The blacksmith leaned back in his chair, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of wool and victory, and whispered to no one in particular, "If your retirement doesn't involve chickens, spoons, and a forge that still remembers your name, you're missing out." He closed his eyes. The fire sighed, the anvil hummed a lullaby only he could hear, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed one last time, softly, respectfully, sleepily. Good night.